Hi, it's Daryl again. I thought that my last anti-hydrogen vehicle video was getting a bit old, so I decided to make a new anti-hydrogen vehicle video. Hopefully, it won't be too long. I like to write a little essay from time to time and talk about why hydrogen vehicles are a terrible idea. And so I'll just read it. I'll just shrink my video to the corner of the screen, and I'll just read through it. I'm not going to look at the camera as I record because it's, I'm just going to read my text on the screen. Okay, so here we go. Yeah. So hydrogen vehicles, the important takeaway, this is what you're going to learn in this video. Hydrogen vehicles are not about the vehicles, it's about globalized hydrogen trade. And what globalized hydrogen trade is actually globalized electricity trade, because they haven't built cables between countries. So the only way to get electricity from countries where electricity is cheap, like New Zealand and Norway, we have a lot of hydro, and a lot of that is, we have surplus electricity when it rains a lot. We have to just let the water out of the dam because there's nothing to do with that water. You have to let it out. You can't just make the electricity. The network doesn't absorb it. So when you have surpluses of electricity, the water is just wasted, effectively. And so I would recommend building a cable to Australia. And in Norway, they build cables. They built one to England or Scotland, and they built some to, I don't know, somewhere else, Denmark or something, Netherlands perhaps, and they export their power that way. That makes sense. Converting it into hydrogen is stupid. Okay, it's just stupid because hydrogen has a lot of loss. Now I'll explain that in my essay. So it's the preamble. Hope you enjoy. Okay, so hydrogen fueled vehicle and fuel trade in New Zealand will harm most Kiwi households, and I'll explain why. Here are my current thoughts on the international electricity trade and hydrogen trade. Some points about the current and near future electric and hydrogen energy market. They call this the hydrogen economy. It's actually a globalized electricity economy. Anyway, so first, people talk about trucks. Okay, trucks are best for short haul delivery runs. So I'm talking about electric trucks. Major companies are already building and selling battery powered trucks. They are not optimal for long haul at the present moment. This will change with better batteries. Electric delivery trucks are for the last mile from the train station or the terminal to the destination, or from the shipping warehouse to the destination. You got to remember that trains are 6 times more efficient than diesel trucks. Okay, diesel trains are 6 times more efficient than diesel trucks. Ships are 6 times more efficient than diesel trains. We use a lot of coastal shipping in New Zealand and Australia and other places, actually. We also use a lot of long-haul trucks in New Zealand. We've got a long and narrow country, and we've got a few big cities. You move goods up and down between the cities and between the ports. Electric trains are powered in most places by overhead wires. They don't really need batteries. In some cases, as a bridging technology, a hybrid train with diesel and batteries and overhead power is a good solution. So we're looking at using these now for our commuter trains in some areas, the longer distance commuter trains, the ones where you go 100 kilometres or maybe 150 kilometres between cities for commuting. For passenger services, but you could use them for freight trains conceivably as well. We should electrify the rest of the railway, Whangarei to Invercargill. So in New Zealand, we've electrified the 500 kilometres mostly between Hamilton and Palmerston North, which are two kind of industrial and farming cities, and everything in between. There's a lot of forestry and stuff in between that gets transported on our electric train network, but we never built the bit that fills in from Hamilton to Auckland or South Auckland, and the bit that goes from Palmerston North to Wakanai. And so there's gaps in our electrical train network. So if you move a train long distance, they typically use a diesel train because Well, I think they use diesel on some legs of the journey, and they actually switch over and use electric engine instead of a diesel engine on other parts. Anyway, that's complicated, and that's the thing that's specific to New Zealand. Anyway, that's interesting, but it's an aside. Okay, so yeah, so we should electrify the rest of the railway between Whangarei and Invercargill. It's a good long-term infrastructure project. It's something that we'll just need in the future anyway. In the short term, we should complete the North Island main trunk route. That would be a good start. If you are concerned about exporting surplus power from New Zealand, we should build a cable from Benmore to Manapuri and across to Tasmania. Okay, so we already have some high voltage DC links in New Zealand. I'm just saying extend that to go across to Australia. And there's a scientist or an engineer who's in New Zealand. I've been to a talk that he gave on the feasibility of this project. It's a completely reasonable project. We could just build this. If you wanted it, you can order it and buy it and install it. That's what I'm saying. It's all well understood technology at this point. If you're concerned with the exporting it, then we need to build that high voltage DC link. Now, the high voltage DC link across the Tasman would have probably a 25 to 30% loss. Okay, that's okay. Some of the energy gets lost because conversion and just loss in the cables, resistance in the wire. But it's way better than the 50% loss you get with hydrogen. Okay, so when you convert electricity into hydrogen, you just straight away lose half of your energy because it's inefficient. There's some physics reasons for that. And they keep saying that they've invented a new thing that's more efficient, but it's not commercially made at this time, okay? Nor will it likely ever be true. The other thing is that hydrogen fuel cells are also inefficient, and they have 50% loss also. So if you use hydrogen to power a car, you automatically have 75% loss. That's just the case. I think the current state-of-the-art electric cars actually have 83% loss. 83% of the energy is just discarded, and only 17% of the energy actually powers the vehicle, the motion of the vehicle, okay? A cable connection can carry power both ways and change direction several times a day to cover the morning and midday and evening peaks in both countries. Now, this is very interesting between New Zealand and Australia because there's a 2 or 3 hour time difference depending on daylight saving time or whatever. But you can actually harmonise. You can harmonise it so that New Zealand has its breakfast peak, and then the east coast of Australia has its breakfast peak, and then we have our lunchtime peak, and then they have their lunchtime peak, and then we have our dinner peak, and then they have their dinner peak, which means that you have the electricity change directions, filling in the gaps. Australia has a lot of solar generation, and they have a big daytime surplus, and some of that energy could be exported back to New Zealand because their midday peak would coincide with our dinner time peak. So that would actually be a net benefit for both countries building such a cable. That would be way more useful than hydrogen infrastructure. If you keep going in my talk, you'll actually get to some natural conclusion. You'll see what I mean as we go. During the process where hydrogen goes mainstream, I've just noticed I've got goes twice there. There we go. They will set it up. They will set it up to export, which I speculate these negotiations have already been done with Japan and South Korea. That's why we are getting pushed hydrogen vehicles from Korea and Japan already. There's been for years. I remember Hyundai Nexo or something, and now they're talking about it's a Toyota. I forget what their one's called. Toyota Mirai hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. Okay, they're talking about these things because they want to set up a trade. They want to buy our hydrogen but provide us hydrogen cars in return. But nobody in New Zealand in their right mind would reasonably use a hydrogen car. I'll tell you why as we go on. Okay, the surplus hydrogen will be exported. A tiny amount of it will be stored locally, not for our use, but just in tanks at the shipping terminal to fill the ships when they arrive from Japan or other countries. Japan's been identified. They have extremely expensive electricity. They're actually going to start up their nuclear reactors again because they realise that their energy market has become so ridiculous. I think normal prices for electricity in Japan have got up to 83 New Zealand cents per unit, which is about 3.5 times what a typical New Zealander pays on their power bill for power. Once large-scale hydrogen production starts in New Zealand, the plant will absorb all the off-peak electricity, all the cheap off-peak electricity, which means the average bid price on the spot energy market will go up, and your power bill and my power bill will go up. It will never go back down because there will always be a bidder of last resort. The hydrogen company will bid up the price all of the time, all hours of the night, all the days of the year. Okay, so electricity, if you don't really understand this, they have auctions. I think it's every 5 minutes or 10 minutes or something like that. They auction the price of electricity in New Zealand, and power companies buy the electricity in auctions. There's a sort of a secondary market of futures where they can buy futures contracts for cheaper prices, but the people get the money early so they can use that money for something else, buying more capacity or something. The auction is interesting, but that's something you just need to know. The electricity you use on your household power bill, the contracts are long-term set contracts where the power companies, I think they buy futures to guarantee the prices. And so householders don't normally see the variances in the daily, the hourly or minutely energy auctions, whatever it doesn't matter how often it is, whether it's every 1 minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes. It doesn't matter. But if you're buying on the spot market, it can get very expensive, and some companies have to buy on the spot market. Some individuals actually have power plans where they buy on the spot market, and that's a very dangerous power plan to be on because it can get extremely expensive, not 5 times more expensive, but 60,000 times more expensive from time to time. When there's a real shortage, the bid price goes up multiples of thousands of the normal price. And that's not supposed to happen, but it does happen sometimes. Anyway, that's sort of outside the scope of what I'm talking about. Anyway, I'll just repeat the thing. I'll repeat what I wrote. Once hydrogen production starts, there will never again be any cheap electricity. At any time, the power price in any other country is 3 times more than in New Zealand. All of the surplus electricity in New Zealand will be bid for and bought on the spot energy market, bidding up the price. This is an arbitrage trade. It's an arbitrage trade. If you don't know what that means, you need to look it up. It's where you buy something in one place because it's cheaper somewhere else or expensive somewhere else, and you can buy it at the cheap place and sell it in the expensive place, or buy it at the cheap time and sell it at the expensive time. Okay. Once the arbitrage trade of electricity begins, it will make our electricity more expensive for us on average. And that's what matters, because your price that you pay on your power bill is it's a long-term average price for power. But if all of the cheap power gets bought, then the long-term average will only increase. That's what happens. Okay, the conclusion. Now, I'm just going to say the thing again, because I think it's important. All the people, and that means actually businesses, because the people are spokespeople for businesses, who want hydrogen in New Zealand also want everyone to pay more for electricity. The hydrogen market and the electric market will be tightly coupled. Once you connect the electricity and the hydrogen market together by building machines that convert one way or both ways, they're coupled. They become one market tracks the other market because one of the things can be made from the other thing. That's what happens. Anyway, why would people want that? It's because they own the power companies too. If they own the hydrogen company and they own the power company and the average price goes up, they make more money either way. I mean, kind of, that's just how I can see that. That's what you would do. Like, if you want to make money out of the hydrogen market, buy shares in the electrical companies in New Zealand. Some of the electrical companies, generation and distribution companies in New Zealand, are publicly traded companies. You can buy shares. Okay? Question is, how many shares do you have to buy to offset the increase in your power bill? If you're a big business, you have to buy a lot of shares. If you're a householder, you might be able to get away with buying $10,000 or $20,000 worth of shares. Anyway, I'm going out of scope, away from what my document was. Okay. Anyway, the point was, they own the power companies too. They'll be making money from that. That's why. I won't be making money. Normal householders won't be making money. You won't be making money, but they will be making money. They will make the money. You will pay more, and I will pay more. Okay? When hydrogen comes in, we all pay more for electricity. That's what's going to happen. Electric car drivers will pay more too, because there'll be no overnight cheap power rates. If they are buying all of the surplus electricity at night time and bidding up the prices for that surplus to some specific price, then the cheap rates are going to go away. Okay? And what's that price? That price is whenever it gets to around 1/3 or lower than some other country that has expensive electricity. So with the current Japanese price being around 80 or 83 cents, if you take 1/3 of that, you get down to about 27 cents. So whenever the price is below 25 cents per unit, the hydrogen company will buy it all. They'll buy all the electricity until the price is bid up to 25 cents per unit. And so sometimes overnight, at the moment, we're like down around 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 cents per unit. Okay? So if we're around 12 cents per unit, they're going to bid it up to 25 cents per unit. Your overnight cheap power goes away. If you're using that overnight cheap power, which all New Zealanders will one day to recharge their cars overnight, because eventually electric cars are going to basically be the only cars, just the same way that petrol cars or cars in general replaced horses. That's just the case. Everybody eventually will have an electric car in their household. Yeah, it will take 15 or 20 years or something for that to happen, or 10 years. But I know some people that are sort of like diehard petrol heads. They have electric cars already. Because they just know they're cheaper to run. And they have a dumb little electric car they use for all their daily stuff. Because if they'd prefer to drive their V8 on a nice weekend drive to go out to a cafe or a restaurant, and they use their dumb electric car for their daily stuff because they just need a dumb commuter car and to take the kids to school and to do ordinary stuff, and they understand the economics, right? What else? Retired people and poor people will pay more too. If you want people in New Zealand to be in energy poverty, then export the energy. That's what the hydrogen people are asking for. The hydrogen people are asking to take all our surplus cheap electricity, the kind of power that people use for heating their homes at night, in winter. You know, the elderly people and poor people, they might want to leave their heat pump overnight to keep warm in winter. Well, they will be expensive to run that. It will be expensive to run that heat pump overnight if the night rate prices go away on your electricity. That's just the case. It's going to be true. People running businesses with processes that run 24/7 will pay more too. If your factory runs through the night and you currently use cheap off-peak electricity that you buy very cheaply on the spot market for 7 cents per unit sometimes, that power is going to go away. The power that you use to power your factory will not be there. You will pay more too. In some cases, your company will become unprofitable because your process that you run overnight every night won't be able to be done cheaply anymore. So if you want businesses in New Zealand to go broke, then export the cheap off-peak electricity as hydrogen. That's what you should do. If you want people's businesses to go broke, make the electricity more expensive. That's what that means. The reason why I promote a Tasman cable is because it is more efficient for the planet as a whole if we build it. Energy policies and emissions policies and farming policies only make sense if you look at the planet as a whole, which means that emissions need to be considered on a per country basis as a ratio of food production. Food production for humans, not domestic population of humans. This is a complex paragraph and it needs its own explanation. I can write a whole essay on that. What I'm trying to say is that when you're comparing emissions from countries, you have to look at what their surplus food is, their export food. So in New Zealand, we have, I can't remember, we have about 50% surplus food. So maybe we run at 145%, something like that. We have enough people. No, we have enough food to feed 45% more than our actual population, right? So that means when you look at New Zealand's emissions, you have to do the emissions divided by the amount of food that we make. That's the only way you should calculate emissions. Emissions should be done on your net surplus food. So, for example, United States, they have a lot of farmland. You know what they do? They export, I think, about 15% excess food, but they have 350 million people. So 15% extra feeds 25 or 30 or 40 million people. Okay? Other countries, Belgium and Germany, they have no surplus food. They make no surplus food. So they make emissions, so you have to penalise them extra hard because they don't even make enough food to feed themselves. You actually have to look at it that way. Australia and Argentina, amazing, huge food surplus. Uruguay has a giant food surplus. Sadly, Ukraine, they had a giant food surplus, but now they might not. I hope they haven't disrupted the farming very much in Ukraine because they're a large net food exporter. And this is important. All of the stuff about electricity and hydrogen, it's all to do with emissions trading. Anyway, that's an aside. See, I told you it needed its own video. Okay. Where did I get up to? Okay, just some more stuff about Tasman Cable. Tasman Cable, there we go, I'll talk about that. Okay, so I got my information because I went to a science lecture a couple of years ago where an engineer or a scientist actually explained the nature of a cable. Okay, so here's what you need to know. South Australia has a huge daytime power peak. They have cheap power during the day because they have a lot of solar panels on houses. Okay? But they also have a breakfast and dinner time peak, which is low supply, high demand, low supply. So they have battery peaker supplies in Australia. They're building more of these. They are giant Tesla batteries. They're building more of them because they are better than hydrogen storage or natural gas powered peaker plants. It already is better to use batteries for this than almost anything else, okay? There's a few places. I went to a place in California where they pump water into a dam over a mountain, and they do it to get the water from a canal system on one side of the mountains to cities, I think it's San Francisco or Silicon Valley on the other side of the mountains, and they transport the water. They use the night rate nuclear to pump the water up to the top of the mountain, and then they let it down the other side of the mountain, where they generate electricity during the day, but also feed the water to the factories, and I think growing regions that want that water as well. And so the process does two things. They transport the water over the mountain range, but they generate electricity, and they move the nighttime cheap electricity that they buy from nuclear, that they let it out during the day to create expensive daytime electricity, which they sell, and that funds the moving the water over the hill. That's something that you can do. That's an efficient thing to do. That's been there for years and years. I went and saw that more than 20 years ago. But you could do the same thing using batteries, okay? But a cable does something different. It's used in slightly different circumstances. Batteries are good for a few minutes or an hour or two. Cables are better for longer duration shortages and surpluses. Here's an example. A dry season in Australia or in New Zealand, but not in both countries, means that a cable could supply continuous gigawatt scale power relief for weeks or months at a time. Batteries can only do that for hours or minutes. Manapori to Tasmania is a good location for a link because both of the areas have ample hydrogen generation at each end of the cable, which means that they have grid connections at those locations for the power to be fed away to do something. If Tasmania has a dry spell, then Manapori could supply at a minimal loss of around 25 or 30% electricity to Tasmania. I said this before. Some people don't think long cables are feasible, but they are building a solar farm in northern Australia to run cables to Singapore, and that will supply 1/3 of Singapore's electric demand. Singapore has got the same population as New Zealand. They probably use a similar amount of electricity as New Zealand does. And they're going to build cables. Now, the Tasmania to Manapori cable would be just 1,700 kilometres long. The Darwin to Singapore cable would be 3,500 kilometres long, more than twice. Almost 3 times the distance, actually. Yet they're still building it. They're building it. It might have a large loss. I think that cable might have a 50% loss, but it's still going to be more efficient to do solar power in Australia and transport that solar power to Singapore. I think that's fascinating. Okay? Following up all of that, I've got some questions. Here's my questions. Are they building a peaker plant which will turn hydrogen back into electricity in New Zealand? I've not heard of it. That's why I say they are not building storage for this purpose. I don't think they're doing that. I don't think that's in the plan. I haven't heard that they are. They might. Maybe somebody should look that up. Okay. How many hydrogen station locations would you want in New Zealand before you buy a hydrogen car? This is a really good question because they don't really address this. I've seen a thing where they showed here's going to be our hydrogen, because I think they're building this now. I think they're building it. Here's our hydrogen fueling network. It looked like it had 20 stations in all of New Zealand, which, there was a cluster of them in Auckland and, like 1 in New Plymouth, 1 in Taupo, and 2 in Wellington, 2 in Christchurch, maybe 1 in Nelson or Picton or something, and 1 in Dunedin and 1 in Invercargill. That's what I think the scope of the network was. Okay, that's what it looked like. Okay, so how many hydrogen station locations would you need in New Zealand before you buy a hydrogen car? Okay. Because if 200 DC charger locations is not enough for people to buy EVs, how many hydrogen stations are enough? reasonably, you would want one. This is what I reasonably think. You want to just drive past one once per week. Something that you do once per week. Maybe you, at the weekend, you always drive the kids to sports, and you drive past one on the way, and you fill up on the way back from taking your kids to soccer or tennis or something. Okay, that's cool. Maybe you've got maybe you've got a job, you've got an office. You go to your regional office every Thursday for a meeting, and you drive past that hydrogen station, and you fill up on the way back from your regional meeting that you go to every Thursday. That's conceivably possible. You might only be driving 300 kilometers every week in your car, and one time you drive past the hydrogen station per week, that's going to be enough to fill up your car. Okay, maybe that's how it is. But when I looked at that hydrogen station map, I don't drive past one every week, not on the initial map that I saw. Okay, so here's something. I've heard of people in California taking a 50-mile detour to fill up their hydrogen car in California when one of the stations wasn't working. Okay, so they had one in the area of California. They've got a hydrogen station nearby where they live or work. They drive past it every week. They fill up their car, but they went to drive past it. This was recently. The person drove past it, and it was out for service or maintenance. Okay, so they had a compressor failure with the high, because they have these high compression compressors. The compressor was out, and so they had to drive 50 miles to another station to fill up their car, and then 50 miles back. I think that's what it was. I think it was a 100-mile round trip, and it took hours to do it, an hour there and an hour back. To fill up the car. But then when I'd got back, they'd already used, 50 miles is like, that's like 80 kilometers, right? They'd already used 80 kilometers of their 500 kilometer range by the time they got back. And so then they were like, well, if it's still going to be out for another week, I can only do 300 kilometers of driving because I have to reserve 100 kilometers of driving to drive to the station to fill up again. That's what happened, okay? That's not great. That's a bad customer experience, okay? I would think that you'd need a minimum of one station with 2 fillers for each 100,000 people as a basic minimum starting point. And then one station on highways running north-south every 100 kilometres. So that's about 50 locations, 50 in main towns and cities and suburbs, and then 10 or 20 more along some north-south highways where you're going, far from a big town or a city. There's places where you need to have one. So, 50 locations, maybe 70 locations. You can have, the thing is that hydrogen filling stations are extremely expensive. I think the minimum of $2 million American dollars per station. And that can be for just 1 or 2 fillers as well. So you have a $2 million station that only fills 2 cars. I think that's the costs. 2 million American dollars. That's 3 million New Zealand dollars. Okay, for 3 million New Zealand dollars, you can build 10 DC ultra-fast stations that can charge 2 or 3 cars at a time, just so that you know the difference there. The thing with electric cars versus hydrogen cars, I'll go on to this, okay. Hydrogen cars are useless to household users because they have all the disadvantages, but not very many of the advantages, okay. They're expensive to buy and fill. They're complex. Do you know what the price of hydrogen is in the United States? I think it's $18 to $25 per kilogram. That means to fill up your car with hydrogen, even at 18 US dollars is about 30 New Zealand dollars per kilogram. The car takes 5 kilograms. That's 30 times 5. That's 150 New Zealand dollars to drive 500 kilometers. That's what the price of hydrogen is in the United States. It's conceivable that it can be cheaper. They might get it down to $5 per kilogram, which means 5 fives are 25. That would be, how did I make? I think I made a maths mistake. Let me run that again. Yeah, no, that, let's say it's, yeah, so that's 30. Yeah, so 30 New Zealand dollars. Oh yeah, that's right. So they might get it down to 5 American dollars per kilogram, which is about eight New Zealand dollars. So eight fives are $40. That's $40 to drive 500 Ks. That would be all right, but you also have to pay ruck, and rucks are $7 per 100 Ks. So you got $35 worth of ruck and $40 worth of ruck as road user charges. In New Zealand, it costs $7.40 to drive each 100 kilometres in non-petrol cars. So diesel and electric cars are supposed to have this ruck fee. They're going to change the way that ruck works because it seems actually like it's not very well done. Let's see if they fix that up. That's another aside. I'm going. There's a lot of asides in this recording. A lot of asides. We're at 35 minutes. Okay, well, I'm just about done. Anyway, yeah, remember hydrogen cars just can't be filled at home like electric cars can. That's the huge advantage. The huge advantage of electric cars is that you recharge them at home. You just plug them in the driveway, plug a cable into the wall, charge your car. In the morning it's charged. You can drive it. That's how electric cars work. They're very simple. Electric cars with small batteries are very efficient. They're very useful. If you've just got an old cheap electric car that only drives 60 or 70 kilometres on a charge, that's really great because most New Zealanders only drive 35 or 40 kilometres per day. So a 70 kilometre range car does all your daily errands and commutes and driving, and you just plug it in at night and it charges from a regular wall outlet, especially if you've only got that short range car. It just charges from a regular wall outlet. If you've got a new fancy car that can drive 500 or 300 kilometres on a charge, you need a special charger installed in your house so that you can plug the thing in and charge it overnight. If you've got a giant battery and you plug it into a regular wall outlet, it's going to take like 25 hours to charge a car, so that doesn't work. But they have DC fast chargers. Now, DC fast chargers, they can fill the new cars can charge at 250 kilowatts. There's a Hyundai, you can buy that right now. I've seen some of these cars in New Zealand. They can charge at 250 kilowatts, relatively sustained charging, which means in a 20-minute charge, they can pick up 500 kilometers of range. That would be optimal. It's probably true that in a 20-minute charge, they can pick up 350 kilometers of range, but that's actually a lot. That's a lot. Like, if you were taking a long drive, would it be fine for you to stop every 4 hours of driving? Every 4 hours of driving, you stop for 20 minutes to recharge a car. I think that's fine. I've got no problem with that. I have an electric car. I can drive it. Every hour of driving, I have to stop for 15 minutes and recharge it. That's how my car is. It's not got a really giant battery, but it's pretty practical. The long drive I normally do is 350 kilometers. Might have to stop 3 or 4 times for 10 or 15 minutes to charge it. That's how my drive goes. And I'm fine with that. I think it's uncomfortable to sit in a car for more than an hour at a time. I much prefer to get out and have a walk around. Get a cup of coffee, buy a sandwich, buy some fruit, buy a bunch of flowers for someone I'm visiting. That kind of thing. Okay, really am going off the thing. Yes, the important thing to know is that new EVs charge 5 times faster now than they did 10 years ago. So they've improved electric cars to 10 times the speed, 5 times the speed of charging. So they only need to increase it times 2. If they charge twice as fast or 3 times as fast, basically you're up to the same speed of charging as a hydrogen or a petrol car fills. So there's no time advantage. Or disadvantage to electric cars at that point. The time disadvantage for electric cars for charging, that doesn't matter to 90% of drivers, because most people don't drive long distances every day. It's only traveling salespeople and taxi drivers and a few other specific cases, sales reps, that kind of thing, that need those couriers perhaps. that need very fast charging cars. And then what else? What else? Oh yeah, the advantage of diesel or petrol vehicles that they have over everything is that you can have a tank of petrol or diesel, and you can take it away with you. If your car runs out of fuel, you can just pour it into your car, and then that will give you, however, got a 20-litre tank. You can, we used to have a diesel ute, and I remember we used to have tanks of diesel that we used for our tractors actually, but you could just put a big diesel can on the back of your ute, and if you were driving somewhere a long distance and you ran out of fuel, you could just top it up. I don't know. It's not that big a deal. Like that doesn't matter much. Not many people. This is my opinion. Not many people actually run out of fuel, okay? People who run out of fuel, it's because you're broke and you don't have money to buy fuel. That's why people run out of fuel. There are a few people that run out of fuel because they occasionally drive somewhere where they don't normally drive. I did this one time. I drove somewhere, I looked at the map, I looked how far away the towns were, and I was like, oh, that doesn't look very far. But it was a very windy mountain road, and I used a lot more fuel than what I thought. And before I got anywhere, before I got to the town that I was heading for, the fuel warning light came on, and then I was like, oh, that's not really good, because I have no idea how far away the next town is. So I just drove really conservatively and didn't run out. And that was lucky. It could have been a very horrible holiday if I'd run out of fuel. But you know what? Did that when I was 20-something years old, and I learned from that. And now I'm careful to look at how, if I go somewhere where I've never driven before, I look at how far away places are, and I plan my journey before I go. And now I've got an electric car that's got relatively a short range. I look at that all the time. I'm very aware of the amount of energy I use and the kinds of distances and terrains I can cover in my car. I actually understand more about energy usage because I have an electric car. Okay. This got very long. What else have I got? Hydrogen vehicles can only be filled at certified multi-million-dollar stations. That's the thing that you have to understand about hydrogen cars. They're the least flexible in terms of fueling. At least an electric car you can plug into a regular wall outlet. I've known people that have they've got electric cars. They've driven somewhere that's too far, and they didn't understand. And you know what they did? They just drove into somebody's house, knocked on the door, and said, "I'm stupid, and I've driven my electric car too far. I've driven it too far, and I don't have enough power to go to the charging station. I can see where the charging station is. It's too far away. Can I have some electricity?" I know people who did that at a cafe. The cafe was like, a cafe out in the countryside. They're like, yeah, sure, just plug in, have a cup of coffee, wait an hour or whatever you need. buy a sandwich, okay? And so I know a person who they saw a farmer at a milking shed, and they were just like, I've driven my car too far and I don't know where I am. I got lost, or whatever it was. They just didn't plan it very well, and the farmer was like, sure, just plug in. There's heaps of power in the milking shed. They just plugged in the car in the milking shed, waited an hour, and then they had enough power to get to the station that they were driving to. They were out in the country, but they just cut it too short because they didn't understand. They didn't understand how far away the charger was. It's fine. Anyway, as I said, I think I've laboured my point. I've actually written that. I've laboured my point. I always do. Okay? I've laboured my point. If you've watched this far through, thanks for watching. These are just my thoughts. And as always, I change my thoughts as I go. Learn more information. I learn new information. When you get new information, change your ideas, change your thoughts. Anyway, those are my thoughts for the moment. Thanks for watching. Take care. Catch you later. Give me a like and subscribe. That's what you're supposed to say. It's the rules. Okay, thanks.